Hi, everyone. You might not recognize me. I'm Guillaume Ross. I'm head of security at Fleet, and I'm replacing Chris this week because he's on vacation. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to Rupa Parameswaran, who is CISO at Amplitude. So, Rupa, nice to have you here. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, thank you. Really a pleasure speaking with you today, Guillaume.
So I would like to talk to you about different things today, including your path into security, how you discovered security, and what made you want to become a CISO. One thing I noticed that's interesting in your career is that, unlike I would say many of us that have been in security for a while, you actually studied something that is relevant to cybersecurity. When many of us went through school that didn't really exist or didn't really exist everywhere, or we accidentally ended up in security. We never really prepped for it. So that's super interesting to me. So can you tell me a little bit more about your educational background? And I know you've done a lot of studying in advanced security related things.
With pleasure, with pleasure. In fact, my security journey, as you pointed out, started off with my PhD thesis way back when. Cannot even remember the year right now, but I the way it started out was I joined Georgia Tech for doing a master's in distributed systems, critical systems. In fact, nothing to do with security, but my thesis advisor at the time got funding from the Air Force Research Labs to work on data anonymization or privacy preserving data mining. And he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, no, you're not considering a PhD right now, but maybe you want to take a look at this, see if it's interesting, something you want to work on." So I read the proposal, loved the idea, seemed intriguing enough, and decided to go forward with a PhD and never turned back from there.
And that was
Completed my
pretty
PhD thesis in privacy preserving data mining, and that's
that
where
that,
we
that
are.
was pretty like advanced, right? For the time, that's something that is barely becoming a common topic now, right? The people who work in privacy, we have been talking about it for a little while, but it seems like you were on the bleeding edge with that. So, is that something that you think is ironically going to start becoming more and more relevant in your career now than it was back then?
Absolutely. At that point of time, there were two papers, research papers, and one really noteworthy paper by Latanya Sweeney about reconstructing even obfuscated data, and that's about it. I mean, privacy and data protection was it was greenfield at the time. Um, and it took about 10 years for it to come up to mainstream, and with the GDPR and the CCPA, I see it becoming more and more important, more and more prevalent, hoping to see more companies work on things like privacy homomorphisms and homomorphic encryption and things of that sort, not just for HIPAA and healthcare data, but beyond that.
Well, that's super interesting. I just know so many people who ended up in security kind of accidentally after being developers or working in IT and then working on security projects. And first thing you know, you're now a security person, but you really set out to do it earlier. And it goes to show that sometimes these types of research can be really useful because you're looking at things that the industry is not going to look at, right? It's something that I don't think companies saw privacy as marketing advantage like 10 years ago even, right? So that's very interesting. And then what made you want to become a CISO, a chief security officer in these different types of companies? Was it so you could have the most impact as possible on as many people with these different ideas of preserving privacy and helping secure data?
Good question. And if you look at my journey, I started off as a developer soon after grad school, and I've played every role, which is like being a developer in a security company to doing security in the enterprise in a SaaS based business to wearing multiple hats, right? Going from an architect and then managing people, heading up security. And through the years, I've learned a lot of things in terms of how to interact with people, what makes security tick, what's thwarted upon in terms of security. And oftentimes, security is considered an afterthought, and more than that, security is considered an annoyance, something that needs to be done to get that checkbox of compliance. And that to me was frustrating at first. And I never understood why people just wouldn't get security and just do things securely from the ground up. That's when I realized there's a lot of education that needs to go in, um, to to talk to people, and it's important for security professionals to learn how to speak the language of the business,
Yeah.
to communicate with the business leaders, with the individuals about risks, about like real issues, see how you can enable the teams and enable the business by doing security, and call out wins and influencing people. And I realized early on that I had the ability to influence, where now being a mom, it's very important for my kids to think it was their idea, not mine.
Oh,
But
inception
the same
technique.
thing happens even in the business, right? You need to make other people realize and want to do security, as opposed to tell them, you have to do this, you have to do this.
Right.
Otherwise,
Well, it's about incentives also, right? So a lot of
exactly.
developers, if they're told, "Oh, you got to create these 5 features in the next 2 weeks," and no one above in the org really believes in anything related to quality, right? Like security is kind of like one facet of quality, but you'll see the same thing with QA in general. If people are not incentivized to do it, then it's not going to happen. So I think you're definitely right that being able to negotiate and do that inception kind of thing where you make people think it was their idea to do something, that's perfect, right? Because then they'll implement things in a way that suits them the most, right? You don't have to enforce a specific solution on them, and that's when people get creative and do their best work. So do you feel like because you've been a developer, you have an easier time dealing with like engineering orgs where you know what pain they feel day to day when they work, so you won't, for example, let's say I've never worked in the engineering company, I've never been a developer. I can show up and just tell people like, oh, why don't you, why don't you just, that's usually a bad sign when someone says, why don't you just, and then they don't have to really even listen to you because they feel like you don't know what's going on. But in your case, they can't do that. You've been doing that job before, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it does help. I will admit, I do. And it's a trade-off, though. It's about, I can develop, I can make changes, so people would just expect the security team to do all the work for them, as opposed to learn and grow. But at the same time, uh, I feel the pain. Having been there, I understand a lot about where security can be a friction, or like a drawback, right?
Yeah.
And which is where I go out of my way to find the right training, the right kind of tools and technology that enables the teams, where things are interactive, which is where the shift left term is something I love today, where it's like I'd rather teach the engineers or the developers how to solve the problem, rather than make it my problem and tell them, come to me, I'll review, I will
Yeah,
fix,
that
I'll
doesn't
let you go.
scale,
And
right? If
yeah,
there's, you could have, well, I mean, some investment banks have security teams of thousands of people,
mhm,
but they still have incidents. They're huge
right.
targets, right? And so
And
when you
that
work,
it also introduces a delay, right? As in, like, if you have a
exactly.
security team, you'll need a complete waterfall model, and that completely fails in a SaaS-based business, which is agile, right?
Mhm.
Where you do not want another person to hold the gate for you.
Well, I think for a lot of like, especially startups, I think one of
Mhm.
the biggest risk is actually going out of business because you don't deliver features and then you don't get customers and then you don't get funding, right? So if you go
Absolutely.
out of business, then you don't have anything to secure anymore. So it's a balance that you have to strike, and it's one of the reasons why like I prefer usually working in smaller organizations where things are super um, malleable, I would say, right? Like you
Mhm.
can make a pretty significant change, but it's not going to take forever. But
Yeah.
sometimes, I've worked in enterprise a lot before, and there is something that I did really enjoy about, the large security projects, right? We've got 60 data centers, 100,000 different people. And I know you've worked for a lot of different companies. So what do you like the most about working in the big ones versus the smaller ones or the newer ones?
Um, That is a difficult question. I think in every company that I've uh, worked at, the key part is challenge, right? This is the nature of the challenge changes. In Let's start off with the small ones because that's something I'm quite passionate about. Where there's always room to build out and grow out the security program in a way that is a business enabler, right? Whether it's building out security champions, whether it's having lunch and learn sessions, whether it's teaching people how to code, also learning new technology and languages, and so on. So those are some things that I find really exciting and interesting. I can go speak to anyone from some from the CEO all the way to an engineer, and just my the language may change, but I'm able to communicate with them and get things done. And the engineer may have a solution for me. So he or she would be talking to me about a conference they attended and a technology that they saw that was cool, and then I can take it and go from looking at it to implementing it in a matter of a month, if
Yeah.
not sooner, as opposed to a large company where I would have to get buy-in and have a long rollout plan, see where it fits into the schedule. Maybe a year or two later, I'll be able to roll it out and see.
Yeah. Well, a lot more effort spent
E-
planning, right?
Exactly. At the same time, the part about the nice thing about a large company is if you want to if you there's already a precedence for security being important. So it's people understand a lot easier. There's lesser time spent on convincing people.
Because
When
there's already an established program. It's more
it's
about
already
making
in
things better than starting from nothing.
exactly. So
Okay.
it's just a matter of like teaching people how to do it, what to do, and so on and so forth. And you already have a team that's the hiring and so on becomes a lot easier because you're already established.
All right. Talking about teams, you did mention like security champions. It's a model that I've seen probably for the first time like 10 years ago, but it was not really common. I think it's becoming more common now. Um, how do you feel that helps in the hiring space where it's almost impossible to hire talent right now, but maybe you can delegate as much security as possible to the people that actually do the work, which
Mhm.
sounds like the best place where to do security to begin with anyway.
Right. Good question. I mean, don't get me started on hiring fees. It's just so difficult. I mean, every time I tell my team, is it we put out a head count, we have a job rec out there, it'll probably take 6 months to a year for me to get that filled. But at the same time, I believe in training and teaching engineers to become security champions, and the added benefit there, at least that I provide as part of my rollout plan, is we teach the security champions to become security engineers, so that if they want that as their career path, they could go that route
Okay.
too.
So
So
someone
building,
who's already a developer or working in
yeah.
IT who's interested in security,
Mhm,
check out if your org has a security champion program, because if you
mhm,
can get on that, you're essentially gaining security experience without changing jobs
mhm.
as well as the skills.
Absolutely. And then since security engineers are hard to get, I mean, once they're looking for another job, they'd be hot in the market.
Yeah. Do you have like some tips for hiring that you've used that have worked before that you're willing to disclose? Maybe you want to keep them secret.
Well, I'd say it's especially for application security engineers. Um, I would choose a good developer who's
Yeah.
security minded over just a security engineer who doesn't know much about languages and development. Because for any application security engineer, it's important for him or her to have the skills to be able to communicate with the engineering teams and the engineers, all of who are very smart at their jobs. So in order to be able to prove to them, show them how to do things right and fix things for them, you need to be able to speak that language.
Right. Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's something I've done in the past with a pretty good level of success as well, where, okay, we're going to work on new authentication, authorization, or something like that. Whoever is the engineer that's the best at doing that kind of stuff usually is pretty close to being an AppSec engineer with a
Yeah.
little bit more training if they are interested. So
Mhm.
if you're a developer and you want to move to security, if you're involved with anything that you're involved with things that relate to security all the time, so that's definitely a path you can take. And then in terms of hiring, I feel like I'm in Canada, so the market is quite different. I almost always end up working for American companies though.
Mhm.
But since COVID, especially, there's so many people are so much more open to working remote that I've been lucky. For example, here at Fleet, we're 100% remote in like almost any country. So
Nice.
that helps a lot when we try to hire where we're not restricted by geographic circumstances. And the other one, pretty much everywhere where I've been is I would try to get people who are more junior and then train them up, right? As
Mhm.
soon as you've got enough senior people, you can do that. I feel like, tell me if you feel the same way, but a lot of people who work in security, everyone's talking about the talent shortage. But
Mhm.
most of the companies out there only want to hire like senior, principal, and staff engineers, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, but for what matters is you need at least one of them. You need to start off. If you're
Exactly.
bootstrapping your program, you do need a senior staff engineer, um, either from the outside or someone who's a senior staff engineer who you can train and tune, who already is well versed with security in the company itself, right? And then you can, once you have established security as a credible program, then you can hire more and more junior folks in the team because you have one chance to prove your credibility at any company with the engineering teams,
Yeah.
or with whatever business teams, right? So you want to have smart people who can answer questions, who are able to communicate, who's able to demonstrate, who are able to explain why security needs to be done the right way and to do it for the others,
So when
right?
there's a brand new, let's say, company that wasn't doing much security,
Hmm.
for whatever reason they start to get serious about it. Usually it's because there's been an incident, but maybe it's just like new management. Then it's like if you're looking for a job, for example, and a company didn't have a security team before,
Hmm.
then maybe your chances of getting in right away, if you have less experience, are going to be lower because they're looking for someone who can kind of mentor you and help level you up in terms of skills before they're going to look for the more junior people. So people
Hmm.
looking for jobs, if they have less experience, it's probably a good idea to look at companies that already have a mature security program.
Right, or nearly, or almost there, right? It's important to read the resume, the job rec carefully. If it clearly says senior or staff, then they're probably looking for seasoned people already, right? If it just speaks about like experience or you need to have these skill sets, it's the recruiter can tell you oftentimes how big the security team is.
Yeah.
So I would say don't feel shy if you to apply to jobs, but ask the recruiter the questions, right? How big is the security team currently? If the recruiter says we're still building it out and it's a team of one or a team of two or even a team of five, ask very specific questions in terms of would they be willing to hire someone junior, who's skilled at development, at application development or infrastructure, as code development. Would they consider that? And the recruiter can, for the most part, answer those questions.
Yeah, that's an important one to try and get as much information about the organization as possible before. And that might also mean, like, one trick that I like is to read other job descriptions that are not necessarily related to security, right? Like, oh, they're also hiring developers and architects and so on. And sometimes security people will say, oh, we shouldn't share that much information, but the reality is you want to know what technology a company is using. It's almost
Mhm.
always in the job descriptions, so
Yeah.
you can kind of get a feel for how mature a company will be by reading these other job descriptions, right? And if you see it
Mhm.
looks like a shop that's using only mainframes and AS400s, and you want to work with containers and Kubernetes, well, then maybe that's not the right spot for you,
Mhm.
unless maybe there's a big project to migrate from one another, which would be amazing experience to gain. And then what about people more on the operations side, right? Like, let's say I'm really interested in incident response,
Mhm.
but I don't have a lot of experience in security. Maybe I have a few skills more on offensive security. There's a lot of resources online and you
Yeah.
can do a lot of stuff on your own, but incident response, it's a little bit harder, right? There is a lot of stuff online, but you've never really done it until it happens to you for real.
Right, right. So for incident response, think it's again, my mantra is it's important to have at least one person who's done this a few times. If you don't, I would say start off with a contract someone, um, and then have them educate or like work with a junior SOC analyst who's willing to learn, right? And then have them get trained on the job, and that's one way to do it, right? As in where you're learning, doing a bunch of tabletop exercises are how I would put it together, right? As in have the security team do on call for instant response tabletops. And that's how I build out my team, right? Everyone needs to know how to respond to an incident. So we and
Right.
we have to
Before you
do
have real bad incidents, right?
exactly.
So people are not, that's when you make mistakes.
Absolutely. We have to do it for compliance anyway. So why not have fun? Why not learn? Come up with tabletop exercises. There was a phishing attempt reported by somebody. Let's see what if it was real, right? I mean, let's see how far one could have gone. Let's play it out together. I mean, MITRE has enough frameworks that you can choose one per month. And I challenge my team to come up with ideas once a month that we can play out, and then extend that to stakeholders outside of the
Oh, so
team.
you kind of like a suggestion box, but
Yeah,
for tabletop exercises.
absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. It's like what's that Twitter account that posts crazy tabletop thing
Right.
every day? Well, if I remember it,
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat. But
Mhm.
now, once you've built a team, what's important if you want to retain that talent over time and not have to, like you said, it can take like 6 months, for example, to hire
Yeah.
someone. If people leave after 6 months, then you should continuously be hiring for when someone leaves, right? And that's
Right.
a problem that a lot of companies have.
Hmm.
So do you have any recommendations for that?
Career growth and professional growth is what I would say. Is in first of all a healthy team, right? It's important to make sure the every individual is um, feeling like they're important, right? That they are a core part of the team, they're adding value, and to keep checking in and having these conversations. And it takes time to build a strong relationship, but it's important for managers to put in that time and effort, both in during one-on-ones as well as in team meetings, right? Make everyone feel like they're being recognized, and feeling and hearing them out in terms of what they want to do. There are some engineers, I mean, some people on the team like to do more policy compliance stuff. Others like to do more of nitty gritty. Hey, I want to become an architect here. I want to learn more. I want to learn more about technology. I want to go to a conference. I want to present in a conference. Um, so nurture those asks. Keep those in mind. Give kudos not just within the team, but shout out to your team members in front of the company as well if they've done a good job. It goes a long way, right? The engineers and anyone on your team needs to feel good about what they've done. Take feedback, positive and negative. Give them feedback timely and often is also important. And even at team meetings, some of the things that I mean, one thing I start off with is, um, tell me one thing that you loved this week, and one thing that annoyed you the most this week,
Kind of like a
one
mini
thing that was
retrospective.
insightful, right? 5 minutes, you got to finish up, no more time. So each one, we go around the table with these. So it makes you think a little bit about like, hey, I did this and that was awesome, and makes everyone realize that you've done such a good
Yes,
job.
sometimes you forget, right? We do so many things, especially in smaller teams. People
Mhm,
are pretty often like less specialized, right? You're not going to work on only one technology. You're going to
mhm,
work on many different things, and that's something that I realize working in startups, for example. You have a week where you're like, this week wasn't good. We didn't get anything done. What are we even doing? But then if you take the time and really look at like, okay, what did we do in the last 3 months?
mhm.
Then it becomes pretty impressive, right? So it's a little
Right.
bit like that. I think it was that Bill Gates quote where he says, "We always overestimate what we can do with technology in a year, but we always underestimate what can be done in 10 years." Kind of
Right.
lose track of time with all these 62 security projects, audit time comes around, and it feels like nothing is moving. So that's really interesting, and I really like the idea of tweaking how you deal with every individual
Mhm,
based on their own personality or preference, right? Like you said, for example, some people might want to talk to a conference, and that they feel like that's good for them, that's good for their career. They're creative, they want to do that, but some other people would just completely dislike that idea,
mhm,
and it's like the last thing they would ever want to do. So you need to know who works on your team and what they like if you hope to retain them. So I guess if you don't have that level of relationship, it's kind of lost in advance, right? As
mhm.
soon as they see something that looks a little bit more interesting, then they have no attachment. So it's that relationship is key.
Right.
So any is there any technology? We've got 2 minutes left. Any technology or change or practice that's happening right now, becoming more popular, that you're looking forward to seeing more of in the next couple years in security?
Ah, yes, infrastructure as code security.
Yeah.
That it's unfortunate that it's still lagging behind so far, where application n- source code scanning, dependabot scans, and all of this has gone such a long way. Infrastructure as code security is still struggling, but I really hope we get good technology. We see more and more good technology rolling in that just removes the alert fatigue, but is really usable and useful.
Yeah, that's really key to me is immutability, right? If you have
Mhm,
something that's immutable, then you know what to expect from it. You reduce that set of alerts that can trigger
mhm,
from it. And sometimes I wonder, like it's actually getting pretty good on the server side, right? You can have
mhm,
containers with almost nothing in them, and you run them there and you monitor them. But we're still all using laptops with these operating systems that take like 100 different gigabytes can be configured in 50 different ways that are pretty hard to track. So I know there's Chromebooks that are becoming more popular, but I wonder when infrastructure as code is going to start becoming more of a norm for end user
mhm.
computing. So
Absolutely.
I wonder about that sometimes. So thanks a lot for your time, Rupa Parameswaran, head of security architecture and operations at Amplitude. I think I said CISO earlier. Sorry about messing up your title. And thanks everyone for watching. And where can they get in touch with you if they have questions, follow up questions, Twitter, LinkedIn, or anything like that?
Yes, my LinkedIn profile would be perfect, which
Perfect.
will
All
be.
right.
Mhm.
So we'll send people there. And thanks everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Have a good afternoon.